kind of update about the virtual cohort and their involvement, and then John has an update about some possibilities.
So throwing some ideas around about what we could do as a organization, because like we took the kind of fun trip over this past weekend to Granny Mae's, and so talking about opportunities to possibly do more of a learning trip, for example. So, you know, there's Brown versus the Board of Education, that's not too far down the highway, or maybe perhaps opportunities to go and visit colleges. So we were talking with, I have no idea what her title is.
Dr. Sharonda Macklin, Dean of Students at McPherson.
We were talking with her about going there to kind of see the culture of a smaller institution, because they have a big event called Campus Blowout, which is kind of a tradition on that campus, and have the opportunity to just kind of like be a part of it, maybe help work it, do things like that. So we get to kind of see what other institutions are like. I've also found that there's a SAGA organization at K-State, so perhaps an opportunity to reach out to them and, you know, go and visit them on their campus. So that way we have opportunities to kind of get to see, you know, what are bigger institutions like, what are smaller institutions like, public versus private, just to kind of get a better sense, so that maybe, you know, as we are job searching, we have a better idea of what we're looking for and what's out there and what's available to us. So look forward to that, kind of hammer down some details in spring. Or I would like to at least have a spring trip. If you guys have any ideas or, you know, institutions that you think might be interesting to visit, or you have connections at, feel free to reach out to me, contact me and let me know, and we can work together on that.
Great. Next up is VP of Social Events and Programs, Nicole.
So I just wanted to thank everyone who did make it to Granny Mae's this weekend. I know that it took a lot of planning and a lot of hard work, so I appreciate those of you that were able to come and support the event, and I will keep you guys informed of other events that we have planned. If you guys have any suggestions or ideas, please contact me, and we can schedule some dates, okay?
Great. Next up is VP of Professional Development, Amber.
Alrighty. Okay, we have our resume workshop with Dan Rice tomorrow at 2 o'clock. In Stockford. It could be helpful to bring a printed copy of your resume if you want to, if you're able to, or you can take notes right on it, or you can take notes and go add and edit. And then on the 27th, so just a week, within that week we'll make some edits from Mr. Rice's recommendations. And then we will need the resumes back into either Jacob or myself, and with the person who you would like to review them. Does that sound good? Is everybody feeling good about that part? And then on November 16th, we'll have a resume rotations day. So the person who you submitted your resume to will be there. They'll bring your resume with them. You'll get a chance to talk with them face to face, and then move on to some other folks that are there to get their input. Is some of that?
There's more detailed reminders on the agendas for you about how to send in the resume to us to make it easier on all of us. So just be aware of that as well.
And then to your student email, I did send out an October calendar for professional development. There's just a few things on there. It's in the form of a Google Doc. That way you could go on there and edit something that's speaking to you that you think we should know about as far as professional development. It could be meeting, another workshop, or just whatever opportunity, a webinar that you think is important that we should know about. That's in your student email. And then I'll send one out for November, just the same. It'll be a Google Doc, so you can go in there, pop in, add stuff that you think is important. Okay, that's all I have.
Okay. The other announcements in this area with professional development is that we have a TPE ambassador, Brittany. So do you have any information, or is that yet to come for you?
Yeah,
with your new role?
We've had an introductory meeting, so kind of the basics of what TPE is all about. I'm sure a lot of the second years know a little bit more about it, but TPE is a conference put on by NASPA and quite a few other organizations, and it's a place where different schools will come with job openings, and that you do kind of a interviews with many different people. So it's kind of like a community interview type thing. Still looking into it a lot more myself. So when I figure out all the different schools that'll be there, I'll make sure I give the second years a list, just so that they feel, if they're interested in going, that they'll kind of know what's going to be available to them. So.
Great.
Awesome, thank you.
The other update is that I'm officially announced as or selected as a NASPA GAP for the cohort. So that means I'm a graduate associate program is what the GAP stands for. But I'm basically the point of contact for NASPA and telling you about the benefits of what's going on and what things we can participate in. And so all that information, I have my first introductory meeting on the 27th over phone. So after this, the next meeting, I'll probably have more information to share out with you from NASPA. So next up is Holly with student programming updates of Career and Student Affairs Month. And
yeah, so sorry for all the email, but hopefully you're putting those on your calendars and you're planning on attending them, especially the reception, because that's also going to have professional staff. And since we're hosting it, we should probably be in attendance of our own reception. I won't be there because I'll be at a conference, but I hope all of you will be there. Dr. Lynn will be speaking, and Jacob will also be speaking about the importance of student affairs. So from a professional standpoint, and then why Jacob went into the program. And then be shoulder tapping undergraduate students who might be interested to attend the conference or the reception. It doesn't have to be that they're going to graduate next year, but maybe if they're a sophomore or junior who's at least been talking about it, feel free to shoulder tap them as well. And it's a dessert reception, so work hard on Friday and then come get some sweets in for the weekend. The day before that at 3 o'clock will be the Google Hangout session where we'll talk about how to get a master's in student affairs and what that really means. Jacob and John will be hosting that. And we're inviting other universities to partake in that. We've already had responses from 2. So that's also something that we would like you to be a part of so that people can ask you questions, but also invite undergraduates that you think would be interested to attend that as well. And that'll be in the cavalry room. I think that's it for right now.
okay.
Let me know if you have questions.
Okay. And then last is, but not least, is VP of Communications, Jared.
So looking forward for next year with allocations, we talked about putting together a budget committee so that we can go through. So if anybody wants to volunteer, put that on the resume. That'll be super cool, awesome. So I'll be heading that. And then for this year, appropriations. So we can't get allocations right now because we haven't gone through the process. But for this coming year, we can do appropriations, and so we can get up to 1,000 per organization per academic year. And so that can be used for trip requests, it can be used for speakers or event requests. So we're looking forward towards either professional development or social events. Kind of keep that in the back of your mind that we can have up to 1,000 towards that.
All right, great. So if you're interested, see Jared after the meeting so we can get that going. And then that closes our updates and kind of old business items. So new business in the presentation, and kind of the rest of the time goes towards this conversation about the competencies. That's what we're hoping to form our meetings around. So to start us off this month, we've chosen values, philosophy, and history, with it being Careers and Student Affairs Month as the historic tradition. And Mr. Brett Bruner is presenting for us today. So take it away.
So within values, history, and philosophy, I'm specifically going to talk about the history side of higher education. And we're going to dig into a little bit about the 10 generations of American higher education, because you must know where you come to know where you're going to be going. So as we go through all this, I'm going to challenge you. So most higher education historians have said that there have been 10 generations among American higher education. But they also predict that the last generation that we're in ended in 2010. So as we go through this, my question for you is going to be, what is the 11th generation, the generation that we're currently in of American higher education? What does that look like? So that's kind of, we're going to start with a little bit, I won't say a lecture style, but kind of walk through just some key points of each of these areas, but then we're going to engage in a conversation about what would that 11th generation look like. So we begin in the first generation, which was the Reformation beginning in 1636 to 1740s. So when you think about that time in history in general, what are some things that come to your mind from 1636 to the 1740s? Who are my history majors are in? One? You have one history major?
Oh, I'm not a history major.
John.
You're the one that raised your hand.
We're still part of the British Empire at this point. We're not an independent nation yet, so.
Absolutely. I think that's the biggest thing to think about when you think about this first generation is all of these schools, so Harvard, William and Mary, and Yale, were all established as adjuncts of those respective churches from England. Really, a lot of these schools, those three schools especially, Harvard, William and Mary, and Yale, are known as schools of the Reformation. Eventually, you'll see during this time, a lot of the lay authority of the church had stronger power than the college president because these universities were established as entities of the churches. When you think about curriculum, a lot of the curriculum during this first generation was really adapted from a lot of the arts courses of medieval universities. The aim for Harvard's, William and Mary's, the Yale's, the schools of these time was really to provide students with a liberal education, but that liberal education was focused on three main areas. That was classical languages, the three basic philosophies of Aristotle, so ethics, metaphysics, and the natural philosophy of science, and the whole idea of logic. The process of education was just as many people in this time viewed the process of education as valuable as the content itself of what they were learning, just the whole idea of a process of going to a post-secondary education. The whole idea of the collegiate way of living started to come about during this time period, and there are always a constant presence of tutors within this generation of American higher education. And so that really gave way that students who were attending these universities felt completely immersed in religion and learning because their tutors were always around them, and this whole idea of the collegiate way of living was continuing to be emphasized. So at the end of the 1740s, we transition into the second generation, which is routinely called the colonial colleges, 1744 to 1775. So when you think about that point in time in American history, what comes to mind? Anything really? 1745 to 1775.
It's the lead up to the Revolutionary.
Yes, lead up to the Revolution. So this is when they say the mold was broken of the Reformation schools when Princeton was founded in 1746. Princeton was originally founded as the College of New Jersey, but that kind of broke the mold and was one of the first colonial colleges. This one time, from a curricular standpoint, we begin to see kind of those old universe pieces that were being taught in the Reformation mixed with new enlightened views, things like Sir Isaac Newton or some of those other pieces. We began to see the curriculum look a little bit more like it might be today. The whole idea of college teaching first became around during the colonial college era. But it's important to note that college teaching in the colonial colleges was really just attracting males of learned status. You see during this time, the whole concept of a balance between church and state, that conversation begins to happen. And we begin to sometimes offer, from a curricular standpoint, what some people might view richer or more intellectual offerings than it was offered in that first generation. But the whole focus, if you take nothing more out of the colonial colleges, then who do you think was going to school during the colonial colleges? Who were the students attending college?
Rich.
Yes. The whole idea of colonial colleges was really to serve aspiring gentlemen. That was really the focus of colonial colleges. We're going to serve those aspiring gentlemen. Not saying I'm agreeing with it, just saying. So the third generation leads us up to 1776 and 1800. So what's happening in American society from 1776 to 1800? People, what'd you say, Maureen?
New nation.
Yeah, a new nation. So it's how we get this whole idea of a Republican education. So when you hear that terminology, if we were to define Republican education, what are some words that might come to mind?
Conservative.
Conservative?
Paid by the government, like the
Okay.
Republic.
You might see some of this, we probably don't use the word Republican education today, but when I define it, you'll probably start to see some of the same pieces because we're having some of these same conversations today. The whole idea of colleges wanted to instill selflessness, patriotism, and virtue in the citizens and leaders of that new republic, the new republic. Selflessness, patriotism, and virtue in the citizen leaders of this new republic. Do you feel like we're having some of those same conversations again today? Do you feel like you're having some of those same conversations with your students?
That's our day's mission.
Or I look at Whitney in your GA position. Do you feel like your GA position is talking about selflessness, patriotism, and virtue in citizen leaders in our nation?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, it connects also to one of our projects in the CCO.
Absolutely.
The American Democracy.
Absolutely. So this whole idea of Republican education was conveyed through students in a couple of ways. So the text that people are using, faculty are using during this time, the topics that they might be using for student oratories, as well as the first law school and the studying of law being established during this Republican education era. During this time, someone talked about upheaval. I think John talked about upheaval. The first time we begin to see student unruliness. And in this generation, they view it as student unruliness. We may use the word student rebellion a little bit later. This whole idea of student unruliness begins to come about. But really during this 1776 to 18 period, there was no model of a state college or university whatsoever. It was still kind of those colleges that kind of broke off from their respective churches. So fourth generation, we move up to the 1800s to the 1820s. And this whole idea of the Republican education has passed. A lot of the conversation in fourth generation is focused on four main questions. Who owns the colleges? What is their mission? What should we be teaching our students? And how can we control our students? Those four questions. Who owns the colleges? What's their mission? What should we be teaching our students? How can we control our students? Are really the four guiding fundamental questions of this fourth generation of American higher education. In this fourth generation, more so than in first, second, or third, we begin to see the worst student violence within the history of higher education thus far start to emerge in this 1800 to 1820s. These student riots that were happening quite a bit really caused college leaders to take a step back, begin to look at their curriculum and say, because of these student riots, they felt that if they reverted back to focusing on ancient languages, that might resolve some of the student riots. So they resorted back to kind of what was being taught in maybe first generation there. During fourth generation, entrance requirements for colleges and universities was very lax. And so colleges and universities felt like they were seeing more immature or poorly academically prepared students than they'd ever seen before. So that caused a lot of universities to say, let's take a step forward, and they begin to raise entrance requirements for the first time in the history of higher education. In doing so, some colleges actually imposed a minimum age requirements. You have to be certain years old to apply to go to college, as well as some of them may require students to have previous coursework in Latin or Greek. During this fourth generation, we saw more schools open that were focused on ministerial training than actually new colleges themselves. We still have a little bit of that connection to the religious piece. We'll start to see some of that shift in a little bit, but we saw more ministerial colleges and training opportunities open. So going into the generation 5, those 1820s to the 1850s, what stands out to you? Do you know much about 1820s to the 1850s?
Right before Civil War.
Hmm? So in the Northeast, we're actually going to start with the Northeast during this classical denominational colleges. Those colleges decided that they were still going to remain committed to focusing on what they call pre-professional liberal education. How would you define pre-professional liberal education?
So like doctors, lawyers.
Okay. Yeah, we're starting to blend a little bit of that pre-professional program still with the liberal education core. For anybody who works in student life areas, Generation 5 is when we begin to see the whole concept of student life emerge for the first time. And student life was actually developed by students themselves, whether that be through literary societies or other pieces. Those students begin to develop this whole concept of student life. So the first denominational college was formed during Generation 5. What is a denominational college?
The religious ones?
Yeah, so a college that's owned, said to belong to that church. So did anybody go to a denominational college as an undergraduate student? And I know some of you did. Okay, so Jacob, denominational college, you went to?
McPherson College, which was Church of the Brethren.
Okay. So Denisha went to Baker University, which was connected to, so, and when was Baker University founded? 1858. Yeah. During the time, when was McPherson founded?
1886, I
So
think.
you kind of start seeing some of these denominational colleges start coming to fruition here. Oberlin College was opened during this time. Anybody know the significance of Oberlin College in Ohio? Oberlin College was actually the first college to admit women to the university.
And it's denominational.
Is Oberlin?
It was, I think. I don't know if it's,
I don't think it still is right
yeah,
this
there are a
point.
lot, but, well.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it was denominational. I still don't know if it is or not, so.
There are a variety that have moved from that.
So in the sixth generation, you begin to kind of see departures from how we've currently been to maybe more where we're going as well. So in the sixth generation, you begin to see graduate education being offered for the first time, which is what a lot of people refer to a German-style university. So Johns Hopkins University opened during this time. They were the first university to really offer that whole idea of graduate education, and they're the ones that kind of started this idea of German-style universities. The Morrill-Land-Grant Act of 1862 happened. What was the significance? And I know some of you second years had this before. What was the significance of the Morrill-Land-Grant Act?
I know that there are land grant universities, like K-State is a land grant university.
The act established that the selling of this land would create the foundational for the land grant universities of the country.
Absolutely. Yeah, so that was pretty significant. So we're starting to see this departure about how we've been for the first half of American higher education. During sixth generation, over 40 women's colleges were chartered for the first time. So Oberlin College kind of started some of that, and now we see 40 plus women's colleges being developed. We also see institutions that begin to provide college education for African Americans. So some of our historically Black colleges and universities begin to be established during this time. Generation 6 is one of the first time that we see courses being developed and taught that are focused on what people might call at this time the practical side. So business courses are being implemented for the first time, and education or teaching courses are being offered for the first time in the history of higher education. We also see some institutions, several institutions start to become co-ed. So they may have originally only admitted those aspiring gentlemen, and now they're becoming co-educational. The elective system was developed for the very first time during this time. So we're now giving students the options of what are those electives that they would like to take. We have for the first time really what we learned full-time faculty who are in the classroom teaching. Previously we've had practitioners, teachers, and now we're having these learned full-time faculty moving in. We're seeing, so this whole idea of college teaching of males of learned status to now learned full-time faculty. Mandatory curriculum is another key component of this area. So what we're putting some stipulations in place, which is who want to graduate with XY degree. And this point in time is when we begin to identify a professional education is requiring someone to have a bachelor's degree. That's really where we get those. So we kind of continue to have that conversation that a bachelor's degree is important in society today. We get that from the sixth generation, from those 1850s to 1890s. So generation 7 is this whole idea of growth and standardization. We'll talk about both of those two pieces here. So during this time, AAUP was officially organized. Who knows anybody know what AAUP is? Have you heard of AAUP?
American Association of University
Professors. So what is AAUP?
So union.
You want to?
Collective bargaining. It'd be different in states that don't allow unions. So it would be Kansas.
So AAUP is officially organized. During this time, we see new kinds of students begin to enter higher education. And we say that because these are students who, from the student life world of things, are those that are eager to throw themselves into campus activities for the first time. So we see some of those start to develop. This whole idea of careers in the business world really starts booming during this 1890 to the World War I area. Intercollegiate athletics is offered for the first time. So we start seeing some of those and how that plays out into our history of higher education. And then the whole idea of standardization. We see three very prominent organizations that they've changed names since they were originally founded. All were formed during this time. So the Land Grant College Association, the National Association of State Universities, and the Association of American Universities. Those were all developed during that time to provide some standardization to their respective areas.
What was the last one again?
AAU, the Association of American Universities. So Generation 8 is going to focus on those differences that happened between World War I and World War II. So what do you know, what's happening in American society between World War I and World War II?
Depression.
Depression. Anything else we can think of?
Tension of isolationism, or can't think of the other word, but globalization, being active in the global environment.
Originally rapid growth to then depression.
So Generation 8 is this whole idea we begin to move from higher education is to educate the elite, to higher education is now to educate the masses. So we begin to see that play out during Generation 8. We see several new types of institutions that are formed during this time. Junior colleges or community colleges begin to be formed. Teachers' colleges, urban service-oriented institutions. They're all kind of formed during this time period. Generation 8 is when we begin to have this conversation. I think this conversation is still in existence, in my opinion it is, but we begin to have concerns about the quality of undergraduate learning. So it's not so much that our students learning, but what are they learning? What is that quality of the curriculum? We begin to have that conversation. Generation 8 is when higher education institutions begin to really try to start advancing knowledge through research on college campuses. So we see that. Selective admissions begins for the first time. So several generations ago, we talked about some people were raising those entrance standards. Now, but in the same conversation here, we talk about education is from the elite to the mass, but yet we're making some selective admissions processes. If you work in admissions or have an interest in admissions, Generation 8 is really about this whole idea. Generation 8 institutions begin to widen their recruitment pool, and instead of just focusing on a small area, begin to look more regionally or nationally from a recruitment pool. So we really start seeing the admissions work play out. Endowment drives begin to happen. So during this generation is the first time that we see foundation work and development work begin to play out, and what we might not call scholarship campaigns or anything like that really start kind of playing out. Honors programs begin to be formed. And we're continuing to now focus more, moving away from those original arts curriculum from medieval universities, and Generation 8 is focused on, they use the terminology, vocationally oriented programs. So how are we preparing students for careers and not focusing on the ancient Greek and Latin that we were talking about in generations 1, 2, and 3. So Generation 9 is the academic revolution, 45 to 75. What do you think about in terms of America in 45 to 75?
GI Bill.
The GI Bill. GI Bill is transforming American higher education. We also have a tidal wave of community college students that we've never seen before. In fact, public community colleges during this time period are opening at a rate that exceeds one new public community college opening every week.
Wow.
So we're seeing new, if you look at most dates of founding of public community colleges, you're going to see schools that are chartered, 30s, 40s, 50s, up to the, 60s, 50s.
So the 18 of the Kansas ones.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
In the 80s, Johnson County was one building.
Yep.
It was one of the last.
Generation 9, you begin to see this idea of how are we moving to common academic standards on campuses, within systems. So this whole idea of common academic standards. what do you think is going to happen to the flagship state universities during this time? We've got tidal waves of community college students. We've got the GI Bill. What do you think is going to happen at a flagship state university during this time?
It grows exponentially.
Yeah, they're expanding left and right. And so at this point in time, those flagship state universities are going to start trying to become a little bit more selective, which gives rise to this whole idea of our regional universities during this time period. So teachers' colleges might have been transformed to regional universities. What do you think Fort Hays State University began as?
Normalcy school.
Yeah,
Teachers' college.
now become a regional university. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 played a significant role during this time period. We see a lot of colleges and universities that try to begin to reverse that underrepresentation of African American students. Generation 9 also is going to start talking about from a student support standpoint. No longer are we just focusing on our support for our undergraduate students, but also our graduate students. So we began offering graduate education way back in 6th generation, but now we're starting to focus on how we're providing support for you all as graduate students. During this point in time, when you think about from a faculty standpoint, we've had full-time faculty, we had college teaching before that, but during this time, during Generation 9, we begin to see faculty who have PhDs, who have been trained in their graduate programs, begin to emerge and begin to start staffing universities there. And of course, student rebellion happens. What are some of the things that might have caused student rebellion from 45 to 75? Vietnam. Korean conflict. Yeah, so student rebellion. You see how we've emerged from student unruliness to student rebellion. So just change the terminology a little bit. So Generation 10, which ended 5 years ago in 2010, this whole idea of privatization. So really in the 1970s, the federal government began investing in American higher education with federal financial student aid for the first time. Title IX emerged, which definitely has not left our radar. We might see, during this time, I think we see more and more students that maybe are turning away from that liberal education that we've been talking about, arts and sciences, into maybe more professional majors. And I'll look at Patty on this one, who obviously works with academic and career advising. Do you think that's the case?
It's definitely the case. And the change from the support of people who came because the increased need for teachers and higher ed as well.
Mm-hmm.
So people originally coming into the field who maybe didn't have a teaching background, so, and still today that's reflective. You lead a discipline with a PhD, you come work at the university, and it's highly likely that they've never taught a class before unless they're in an area that is totally tied to education. And so, and we're seeing a lot of those people retire right now. So since 2010, the retirement numbers and the prospect of more jobs for higher ed is greater because so many of them came to higher ed in the 60s.
During this time, we began to see, during the 75 to 2010, we begin to see that colleges and universities are having to turn to the private sector for more and more revenue. Fewer and fewer dollars are coming maybe from the state than they've ever had in the past. And so we have to rely upon the private sector for revenue. At private colleges, you begin to see this strategy of high tuition and high aid emerge for the first time. So while we may charge XYZ dollars, we're also maybe trying to provide a higher aid package. So that sometimes is also referred to as a tuition discount. You may hear that terminology. Within the public sector, especially at regional universities and the community colleges, you're seeing those declining appropriations from the state government. But in the research universities or the land grant or the public, the flagship universities, you see them trying to more than ever increase the volume of research that they're producing to maybe find another revenue source there as well. Of course, we have the economic turmoil that was 2008 to 2010. That probably could have been in a whole 11th generation of higher education itself. Having lived through that as a new professional, it was very interesting first start for me going through that economic turmoil. And I think now, as you think about as we into this, the whole idea of graduation rates are lower than we've ever seen them before. As well as we continue to see this whole idea, the high price of tuition and our students' reliance on student loans, and the amount of student loan debt that they're graduating with has never been higher. So recognizing that, what do you think what are going to be some of those characteristics? We're now 5 years into this 11th generation of American higher education. So you've probably been a student or now a grad student for a good chunk of this 11th generation. What are some of those characteristics of the 11th generation of higher education in your opinion?
Security, so like tenure.
Okay.
Is that the 11th generation or would that be the 10th?
That going away?
Well, that it exists. I guess that it's going away would be 11th.
I'm just, because it became very real during 10. I mean,
I think the type of student we're serving, I think most of us are millennials, but now we're to Generation X, right? Is our freshman class?
Z.
And Z, that's what I meant, I'm sorry. Generation Z, and like, I think there's a lot of discussion about what type of quality of education we're providing them, and then they're not prepared when they come to college anymore like they used to be. And so I think there needs to be more discussion, and I think it's starting to happen about the high schools, like K through 12, and how they're preparing them for college.
Okay.
I think we see non-traditional students of not the traditional age group join in. We see virtual programs growth across the country, not just at Fort Hays, but also for-profit institutions, I think, have grown within that Generation 10 and continue to grow in the Generation 11 of you pay us this amount and we'll make sure you have a degree. So I think that's something that could be one of our characterizations too.
I think also the growth of graduate programs because of the amount of students that have bachelor's degrees in the workforce.
Degree inflation.
Even just having the higher emphasis in technology with the technology boom we've been having through the 2000s, I mean, that's the newest part of the NASPA competencies. Absolutely.
I think something that might come up is the closing of some universities. It seems like the continual decrease in funds.
including the state.
Especially from the state perspective, a lot of universities might start shuttering rather than opening. So that'll be a big one.
And there are privates already doing that.
Potentially part-time students or like students who are working full-time in, the amount of, I see that anyways. It's a difference from when I was in school. Where students work a lot more hours than they ever did when I was in school.
I think students expect a lot more too. So like if you look at housing, a lot more students are wanting having their own room or their own suite versus living in a traditional residence hall. On top of that, a lot of like the residence halls that grew out of the GI Bill, I think are coming around where they need to be rebuilt or highly renovated.
And a lot of those things tie back to two very specific things. So when you're thinking about tenure, the movement away from tenure, you're talking about K-12. So what is that overarching theme that so many of those things fall into? That we hear about on a regular basis in higher ed.
Accountability,
Definitely.
like K through 12, especially in Rochester where we are, a lot of the colleges are starting to add part of their program to the K through 12 areas so that they can help them, so the students are prepared to make it to college. I see that as a trend that's going to continue on as colleges will start taking over because the learning isn't happening. So.
Sorry, I'm just jumping in. So in regards to accountability, how does that lead to the other factors that don't fall under the accountability umbrella? So you think people are talking about, getting more education, they're talking about working more when they're non-traditional as compared to the traditional student. We're talking about high student loan debt. What is that a reflection of?
Societal values, in my opinion, because it goes back to democracy and where the vote's going. And it was back in Generation 9 and Generation 10 that society started turning its back on education within public funding and within taxation.
So from that, because Generation 9, those parents didn't borrow money to buy a house. They didn't borrow money to buy a car. They didn't borrow money to do anything. So like people in my parents' generation, I remember I was in college. My mother had to get a credit card because she traveled for work and they wouldn't allow you any longer to make a hotel reservation unless you had a credit card. My parents paid. If they couldn't pay, they didn't do it. You know, they didn't rely on credit. My generation, look what we've done to you, right? Because we've acquired credit cards. We've allowed those things. We've encouraged our children to believe that it's okay to buy things that you can't necessarily just pay for. And not stopping at a house and a car, but everything, right? I want a Gucci purse, hey. I want a Coach purse, hey. You know, everybody will give you a credit card, right? And that's part of lack of financial knowledge where non-traditional students may be in my generation and they aren't going there. They're not encouraging their children to go there. But you think about freshman seminar, we talk about finances. We talk about that for a reason. Because my generation, even though they may know it, that's not what they live and that's not what they've shown to their children. Living beyond their means became very big for Gen 10. Generation 9 didn't do that. And so, you know, from a perspective, what is it that higher ed's created the debt? Because a lot of students who have school debt don't have school debt because they were paying for school. They bought a car, they buy a brand new smartphone every time a new one comes out, okay? And we used to refer to that as everybody wants to live bohemian, but that's not what they want to make, okay? You know, so watching the difference in technology, you know, hey, the new MacBook just came out. Hey, this just came, you know, learning how to live without because my generation has provided, their kids asked for it and they would give it to them. There was nothing encouraged them necessarily to save for that. So the idea of saving for college, a lot of people in my generation didn't do that for their children.
I think even nowadays, especially with just, I would say the massive increase in just the cost in general, where before you could work a part-time job and easily afford to go to college because it cost you $400.
$25 a credit hour when I was a freshman.
Yeah. Nowadays, you're lucky if things are under $200 to $300 for a credit hour. And that's
Inflation of everything.
Just the general inflation across society itself has shattered that perspective of, well, you can save for college because you can't anymore. Unless your family already makes $200,000, $400,000.
But everybody's living outside their means, everybody.
Even the people that have money, you know, because I always say, you know, the idea is if I gave everybody in the room $1,000,
What would you do with it?
you know, in a month, how many of you would still have any money left? How many of you could have made it? You know, the idea of living with what you have, no matter how much money you make, right?
Yeah.
It's that concept of I can get another parking ticket another time because my parents are going to just pay $3,000 to get that hauled off my account. You know, because they don't have an appreciation for the fact that, gee, get a parking permit. You know, so some of those like very basic things, and we talk about, you know, do we mentor those things to our students, or do we just always go, I want it, so I got it? And people are like, well, they were able to get it, and you know, they're not in jail for not paying their bill yet. But more people in Gen 10 have lost their homes, they've lost their cars, they've become homeless. And not that everybody becomes homeless because that they don't understand how to live within their means, but we have been a generation that has impacted your generation that says we don't save for a rainy day because we want it now. And we've said to you, it's okay to want it now. When I was a kid, McDonald's was in our neighborhood, you know, in Sonic. I lived in the South, so in Sonic. But we didn't go there every day. We didn't go there every week. We didn't go there every month. If we went there, it was like, woo, you know, you went there. Now, you don't think about it, right? Hey, the burger's 49 cents on whatever day, so let's eat there, right? Wings were half price on the 15th, let's eat there. And it's just changed what that is and the support system because you're not sitting down and eating with other people, right? You're not getting to know people the same way. You're not being able to share the values and the differences and the things that you have sometimes. which is why student affairs becomes so important, right? Because all these people come to us and everybody doesn't know. They don't even know what their values or their ethics are. A lot of people have no concept what a car payment or a house payment is. I remember when somebody asked my son one time, we built a new home, and he's like, somebody asked him to do something, he goes, oh, I don't know if I can do that because, you know, my parents just built a home for $200. He was like in second grade, he had no concept. $200? Dear, that didn't dig a shovel, you know, but, you know, but that concept of what is real. You know, when you go and you're offered your first job, how do you know if it's enough? They offered you a job, yay, yay, yay. And it amazes me when people don't ask about the benefits and don't ask about the money. They're just like, offer me a job. And it's like, and are they going to pay you? You know, because what is it is it going to allow you to think about the debt that you have? You know, to think about what comes next. You know, are you going to live in the car that you already own because the debt that you have cannot be covered by the position that you secured? And what does that look like? You know, taking every bit of financial aid because they offered it to you, getting students to understand that just because they said you can have $5,000 in loans doesn't mean you should take $5,000.
And your employer's not exactly going to pay you the amount that you want to cover the debt that you collected.
You know, and where you live. And if you go on to get another graduate degree, the cost of that, what's the value of that if you're in an institution that has, you know, some type of tuition assistance? But I mean, those two things are huge for your generation, financial stability and accountability. Because how do you get to that point that you end up in that much debt when you graduate and you didn't know you had it?
So what I would encourage you to do is take a few minutes and reflect upon this, because this, you know, this whole workshop could be a piece of your artifact for your homing experience. So now that you're aware of the history and the 10 generations of American higher education, potentially the 11th, what are you going to do with it?
What's your philosophy for student affairs as a professional, or depending on the area? Apply for an advising job, they are going to want a philosophy. If you're wanting a teaching position, they want a philosophy. What influences what your philosophy is and what you give to students.
You can do that here, you can take that with you, but I would just encourage you to make meaning of this, because if you just said, great, I listened to the 10 generations of American higher education, that's awesome, but what are you going to do with this information? That's all I got for.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Brett. We've got about 4 minutes left. Are there any other announcements from other offices that would be for the good of the group?
Sorry, I'm not in another office in the same one, but I forgot to mention that I have a thank you card for Mr. Dan Rice that's going around, so I guess to sign it, but.
Oh, perfect.
Take some sign form. Thanks, guys.
Perfect. Okay. Seeing none, the meeting is now adjourned, and we will see you next November 16th.
Tomorrow.
Oh, we'll see you tomorrow for the resume workshop, right?